Welcome to the Frontenac Historical Society and Museum. We were founded in 1976 as an offshoot of the Bicentennial Committee. At that time, a group of civic-minded residents of Union Springs thought it was important to preserve the history of our community and surrounding areas. We eventually became chartered as a museum by New York State, and we service the towns of Ledyard, Fleming, Springport, Aurelius, and the village of Union Springs. We are located in what was the first Springport Presbyterian Church. It was built in 1839 on land that was given to the church by George Howland, a prominent New Bedford whaler. As part of the bicentennial, this beautiful quilt was made by the women residents of the community to celebrate the history of our community. Depicted here are many of the civic organizations, historic buildings, as well as lake views, showing the interests of our main room of our museum, which was the sanctuary of the church. This is the room in which we hold many of our community events and programs, as well as have revolving displays which highlight areas of interest in this community. Behind me, you will see the artwork of Jennifer Susi, one of our local residents. Jen is a multi-talented artist and was the featured artist at our opening program, which was held in May of 2023. Next year, we will be featuring another famous woman as we're converting this room into a women's history room. This will take us several years, so be patient with us. Over time, we hope you'll come back and enjoy what you see here. Also behind me are the opalescent glass windows, which are not original to the church. They were added sometime in between 1910 and 1920, and we know this from the obituaries, which are featured next to each window. They represent to whom the window was dedicated. In this area of our main room, we're featuring an ardent suffragette who lived here in Union Springs, Zebedia Alleman. There was a rich history of the Quakers in this area, and with them came their sense of equality both in women and in races and ethnicity. Particularly interesting behind me is a petition which was signed by the women of the village and town of Springport protesting the Mexican War in 1848. So we see the early influences of equality and the importance of the voice of the women of the community. Zebedia was, as I said, was an ardent suffragette. She attended many of the national conventions. In fact, she's mentioned in Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony's book, The History of Suffragettes, of suffrage rather, as one of the women as one of the suffragettes who was most frequently mentioned in that book. She was chair of the statewide school committee, and in New York State, a woman who owned property was eligible to vote, and this was well in advance of the passage of the 19th Amendment. The final item we'd like to share in the main room is the Salvage Crazy Quilt. This was hand embroidered by Charlotte Johnson Salvage, who was born in Ireland and emigrated to the United States in 1858. She lived on a farm in Oakwood in the town of Aurelius. Notable in this quilt are the many patterns and fabrics that she used, but also too, she was known to use items from the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, commemorative ribbons. The next room we're taking a tour of is the Norma Belak Genealogy Room. For many years, Norma was the genealogist of the museum and was a dedicated researcher and archivist of all kinds of information about families within Union Springs and the surrounding areas. She followed in the steps of her mother was an active member of the DAR and helped many people in their applications for the DAR, and countless families over the years find their family history. In this room we have many resources that are available to anyone to come and research free of charge. We also have access to Ancestry through our computer and welcome anyone at any time by contacting our genealogist. We also have an extensive collection of yearbooks, which are always popular, especially with our younger visitors. In fact, one of my favorite stories is when Richard Palmer's granddaughters came to visit with the Palmers, with their grandparents, and found their grandfather in the yearbook. And they paused for a moment, looked at the yearbook picture, looked at their grandfather, looked back at the yearbook picture, and finally looked back at their grandfather and said, "Grandpa, what happened?" Our next room to visit is our schoolroom, which has recently undergone a change in exhibits and will continue to undergo some changes as we convert to a children's room. Over my left shoulder is an exhibit that was recently mounted, which shows early photographs of the Union Springs School. And panning around to our next exhibit, we have photographs of one-room schoolhouses in the Fleming, Springport, Ledyard, and Aurelius townships, as well as locations on the map where they may be found today or where they were located. We're now located in our back hallway, which is, we've had a little fun with this area. These are the original jail cell doors to the Union Springs Village Jail, which was housed in the building that is presently the location of the Land of Lakes Real Estate Company. These jail cell doors predate the Civil War. We know that by the design of the grid on the door. And hanging from the door we have handcuffs that were also from the jail. They're quite heavy. We love to share them with our school children when they come, and they're amazed at the weight of those handcuffs and the size of the openings as well. On the other wall, we have memorabilia from some early Union Springs fires that took place when the downtown area was destroyed, most of it in 1902. And also our pumper, the Princess Louise, an early fire company engine. And at one time, Union Springs even had a police chief, Herbert Myers. And here we have a photo of Herbert in his uniform as well as his badge that was generously donated to us by his family. We are now visiting the Lake Room and Native American Room. This room contains many artifacts that are on loan to the museum by the family of Edgar Smith. These were items that were organized by a student at Ithaca College as part of her senior project as an archaeology major. And in here are numerous items of utilitarian items that were used and found in this area, many of them dating back many, many centuries. Center of the room are located artifacts from the wreck of the steamship Frontenac, which burned just off the coast of Dills Beach on Cayuga Lake in 1907. Sadly, about 7 or 9 people lost their lives, many of them women who were unable to swim because of the weight of their skirts and their clothing in the water. We also have located in this room the skull of Charles Courtney, who was a famous oarsman in the late 1800s. He lived here in Union Springs and owned a planing shop, but he's also very well known as a successful coach of the Cornell crew. What is the Thomas Eldred Military History Room? Tom was a longtime teacher of American history in the Union Springs schools and served as county historian for many years. To honor his service to our community, we have changed the name of this room to recognize Tom. We are so fortunate to have two Civil War uniforms, the first being worn by Dr. Benjamin Fordyce and the second by Charles Sugar. Fordyce lived just 2 doors away from the museum, and his attic became, or the contents of his attic really became the foundation of the collection of our museum through the generosity of the Hecht family, who purchased his home and found numerous items of both his from the Civil War as well as his son from World War I. We are fortunate that we also have Dr. Fordyce's saddle, which is a McClellan saddle, and we also have his painting, his portrait on the wall. As we continue around the room, our most notable print in the entire museum is this of the Andersonville prison, which was done by Thomas O'Day and was restored through a grant from the Lower Hudson Conference of Museums. We continue on to World War I artifacts, including those of Rob Roy McCulley from Union Springs. And we continue on and feature items from World War II, notably those from Colonel Bruce Carr and his brother Eugene Carr. Gene was a lieutenant colonel who generously gave us not only his dress uniform, but his flight suit and also his helmet. Gene fought in 3 wars, flew planes in 3 wars, and is fondly remembered for his service by many of our residents. And as we continue around, we see artifacts from the Korean War, notably the silver store that was earned by Roger Lewis, a local resident during the Korean War. We are now visiting what is the Union Springs room, and this room is devoted to the business and industry of the early days of the village. Over here we have remnants and artifacts from the North Mill Pond, and what very notable is the stone mill, which remains today. It was built in 1836 by our benefactor George Howland. Howland, interestingly enough, never lived here in Union Springs, but he liked what he saw in the area, particularly the fact that the pond never froze over, and he decided to invest his dollars in this area, plus he established his 2 sons in business here as well. And continuing on, we have a display of early pharmacy artifacts from both the Rogers and the Doremus Pharmacy here in Union Springs. And then we continue further, and you'll see the history of Cayuga Lake National Bank, which has supported the museum throughout the years, both financially and with publicity as well. We are grateful to this bank for supporting the museum. We have here an adding machine that was used, and also the desk that was used in the very early days of the bank. Continuing on, the remainder of the room is devoted to what would be an early store, what we saw as an early store. And in the village was the Mercer Road General Store, which we've tried to reconstruct and depict here from what we think it may have looked like. And included, in addition to advertisements and the many types of artifacts that would have been sold in an early store, we have a wonderful rendering that was done by our artist, Jen Susi, of Daniel Mercereau, based on a photograph she worked from. So it is a very good likeness of Mercereau, and we've actually seen people try to pluck apples from that basket. They look so real. And then our last display is devoted to the printing of the Union Springs Advertiser, which was in existence from the late 1860s until the 1930s. And we have the typeset case from that newspaper, which is quite exciting to us. We hope you'll come and visit the general store sometime soon. In our main hallway of the museum, we have devoted space to the local artists of this area. And we have several nationally known artists who worked from Union Springs at the time. One of them is William Henry Yates, and you see before you several of his paintings as well as his palette. Down the hallway we have the work of lesser known artists, although we do have a Frank Barney. He lived from 1862 to 1954, and his paintings are quite in demand today. And behind me is a wonderful oil pastel that was done by John Augustus Page, another recognized artist. And the oil pastel is taken from a hilltop in the village of Union Springs overlooking Cayuga Lake and Frontenac Island. This is our final stop on your tour of the museum, and we're stopping at the beginning. This is where you would be entering the museum when you come to visit us. And in this area we featured the work of local artist Robert Doremus. Bob was born and raised in Union Springs, the son of a pharmacist. He married a local gal, Janet Davis. He was original work at home before work at home became popular, as he would work in his home on Seminary Street and mail his work to his publishers and agents in New York City. He's known not only for his illustrative work, but also for his paintings. And behind me are several of the magazines that he illustrated for, as well as a restaurant and bar, which is the directional sign, was the directional sign for the Aurora Inn in nearby Aurora.
I just like this room in particular because it has all these documents like that, the Andrew Vonville prison. Like looking at that, like looking specifically over here at the clothes and uniforms. And I liked looking at these books over here with the Times, Civil War, and the Echoes.
Hi, I'm in from St. Louis, Missouri, and we're just kind of passing through town and stopped into the Frontenac Historical Society Museum, and this is an absolute gem. There's incredible local history, and what I find amazing is how many ties there are to national events and national history. If you find yourself in the Finger Lakes, make sure you stop by the Frontenac Historical Society and Museum.